Support.
The maestro, please.
Day 28 of month 2 of year 2021, and I'm doing so many numbers because today we're talking about Ariana Grande's 34 plus 35.
Ariana Grande.
This marks the third time we're doing an Ariana Grande song. We did the first one as the 4th ever episode of Pop Analysis back in 2016 when we did.
And boy, got me walking side to side.
And we brought her up again almost 2 years later when we looked at
Thank you, next, thank you, next, thank you.
Since then, she's continued to release high-profile singles.
I want it, I got it, I want it, I got it, I want it, I got it, I want it.
As well as doing some high-profile collaborations.
Rain on me, rain on me.
Background.
34 plus 35 originally came out on October 30th, 2020. It charted 2 weeks later at number 8. It bounced around the charts for a while until the end of January the following year, where it hit number 2 for the first time. It moved around a little bit since then, but as of the end of February, it is back at number 2. 34 plus 35 is the second single off of Ariana Grande's 6th album, Positions. Positions came out at the same time that 34 plus 35 was released as the second single, but both were preceded by the title track of the album and its first single.
Switching up positions for you. Getting in the kitchen and I'm in a bedroom.
A big reason for this song's resurgence, and one of the primary reasons that it got to number 2 in the first place, was the remixed version of the song.
Can we stay up all night, fuck a jet lag? You bring your fine ass in overnight back. Add up the numbers or get
A quick note, while the first time it got to number 2, it was credited to the remix with Doja Cat and Megan Thee Stallion, this second time it is credited to just the original version of the song. The reason that is because if there are multiple versions of a song or album on the charts, they will always give the top spot or just the spot entirely to whichever version contributed the most to the song or album's numbers. So the first time it hit number 2, the spot was given to the remix version, as more people were listening to the remix, as it had just been released and there was a music video along with it as well. However, this time it hit number 2, more people were listening to the original, probably because the deluxe edition of Positions came out quite recently, and while it does have both versions, more people are simply listening to the original version as opposed to the remix. So there, now you know how the charts work a bit better now. Alongside Ariana Grande working on this song, we have quite the lineup. Taylor Parks, Tommy Brown, Victoria Monet, Xavi, Peter Lee Johnson, Mr. Franks, Stanage, and Scott Nicholson. Obviously that's a lot of people, but 3 of them are returning. Taylor Parks, Tommy Brown, and Victoria Monet we all talked about when we did Thank You Next. Starting off with Taylor Parks, since Thank You Next, she has had 1 additional pop credit to her name. TB Hits, aka Tommy Brown, has also gotten a few more pop credits to his name since the last Ariana Grande Pop Analysis. Those being
Close with the kiss, so he call me ice cream. Catch me in the fridge, right where the ice be.
as well as
Feel so holy, 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 holy.
Good to note that Mr. Franks also helped out with both of these, and Victoria Monet helped out with Ice Cream. Speaking of Victoria Monet, she's gotten even more pop hits outside her collaborations with Tommy Brown, the biggest being
And that's just how we do it, do it, do it. Yeah, that's just how we do it, do it, do it.
Moving on to people we haven't talked about before, Xavier Herrera, known better as simply Xavi, has 1 additional pop credit to his name besides his works with Ariana Grande, that being
I whip the pad like I contain. I just got me a beam. Used to ride his theme. Some high.
Peter Lee Johnson, who did all the string stuff, if the picture didn't give that away, also has some pop credits to his name outside of his work with Ariana Grande, the biggest being
Sometimes life's a mess. I get high when I'm upset.
and
Rich nigga shit I do a lot of. Nigga, we be sipping out the bottle. I be fresh as hell, rockin'.
Stephen Franks, better known as Mr. Franks, also has some additional pop credits that we haven't yet mentioned, the biggest remaining one being
I be drunk texting you. drunk texting.
Although good to note that Tommy Brown helped out on this one as well. Albert Stanage, simply known as Stanage, is actually more known for his own music than his credits with others, as this is his first big pop credit. Finally, we have Scott Nicholson, who oddly enough is Ariana Grande's choreographer and one of her backup dancers, and this is his first writing credit, period. He came up with the line,
Just give me them babies.
34 plus 35 is released solely by Republic.
Form.
34 plus 35 is a pop song, is just under 3 minutes long, 4/4 time, F major, and 110 beats per minute. 34 plus 35 gets us right into it at the very beginning as it opens with the first verse.
You might think I'm crazy, the way I've been craving.
Following that, we get our first pre-chorus,
I don't wanna keep you up, but show me, can you keep it up? Yeah.
which then leads to our first chorus.
Can you stay up all night? Fuck me till the daylight.
Continuing normal conventions, we then get the second verse,
You drink it just like water.
as well as the second pre-chorus,
I've been drinking coffee, and I've been eating healthy. No one keep this wine.
and the second chorus.
34, 35.
We then get a long bridge, although some people argue this as a third verse, but considering its length and how different it is from the first two verses, it makes a lot more sense to me to call this a bridge.
Baby, you might need a seatbelt when I'm riding. I'ma leave it open like a door, come inside it.
Which then leads us to our third and final chorus,
Fuck me till the daylight. 34, 35.
before going into the outro,
Means I want a 69 with you. No shit.
which then slowly fades out and, as the name implies, ends the song.
Math class. Never was good.
Strings.
The most prominent instrument in the entire song consists of 3 different string lines. The top one gives us various harmonies, usually in the form of 2 or 3 string parts. The middle one mostly just does those pizzicato figures, which is the plucking sound you're hearing. And then we have a cello on the bottom, giving us our bass figure. Notice how the top and bottom string parts do change. The cello does play different notes and different rhythms. The top 2 strings doing harmonies have different effects on them with the fall or the tremolo they did at the end of the previous figure, but that middle one, for the most part, simply stays the same. Moving on in the song, while the middle and bottom string parts do stay relatively the same, the top ones do have some slight alterations to them, and the harmonies that they play are just some little ad-libs that Peter Lee Johnson is doing throughout the song. The harmony changes in the top string lines are very subtle, and I've filtered out the vocals as best I can so you can clearly hear them, but again, they're always very slight. As the texture thins later in the song, Johnson does some more things with the string parts just to make them a bit more diverse. Note here at the end of the second bar having that little grace note to that high F. And in the following phrase, he adds just a bit more variety to those upper string parts. It's in the second pre-chorus, though, that we get our biggest change. That middle pizzicato line is now just bowing normally, which is what arco means, and we get this lovely counter melody to Ariana Grande's vocals. Do note that I put the vocals back in, though, because when you filter out the vocals, you also accidentally filter out that violin line.
I don't wanna keep you up, but show me, can you keep it up? Yeah. Cause then I like to keep you up, so maybe I'ma keep you up.
It's a subtle change, mostly because the strings take a back seat to Ariana Grande's vocals, but it really gives more depth to the song, in my opinion.
I've been drinking coffee, and I've been eating healthy. No one keep this wiki, yeah. Saving up my energy.
Bass.
The only other instrument in the song, the bass, and we don't even get it until we hit the first pre-chorus in the song. part does change ever so slightly though when we get to the chorus.
Verse.
Ariana Grande starts off fairly low in her range, bottoming out at that B flat, but working all the way up to the C over an octave above it. In addition, she goes back and forth between triplet figures and dotted 8th, 16th note rhythms.
You might think I'm crazy, the way I've been craving. If I put it quite plainly, just give me them babies.
Moving to the second half of the first verse, Ariana Grande, now staying in the middle of her register, starts off by doing just triplet figures before quickly switching to those more 16th and dotted 8th note rhythms, given she more focuses on the 16th dotted 8th as opposed to the dotted 8th 16th, the reverse of what we talked about before. In addition, she has a harmony with herself under her main vocal line and some ad-libs.
So what you doing tonight? Better stay doing you right. Watching movies, but we ain't seen a thing tonight.
Starting off the second verse, we pretty much just have quarter notes in the main vocal line. First, that melody works its way down, but in the second half just kind of stays in the middle. We have some additional ad-libs and harmonies on water, but the biggest addition is at the end of this phrase, when her additional harmonies start off below and work their way above the main melodic line, completely in thirds.
You drink it just like water. You say it tastes like candy.
The second half of the second verse is actually quite similar to the second half of the first verse. We still have the same rhythms, the same notes, the same melodies, we still have that same harmony underneath the main vocal line, and we even have that ad-lib at the end. However, we have an additional melodic vocal line over top all of that as well.
So what you doing tonight? Better stay doing you right. Watching movies, but we ain't seen a thing tonight.
Pre-chorus.
The pre-chorus has a lot of 16th and 8th note rhythms and spans the range from middle C to the D, an octave above that. In addition, in the breaks of the main vocal line, we get lovely additional harmonies, all ending the first phrase on a nice melisma.
I don't wanna keep you up, but show me can you keep it up? Yeah. Cause then I'll have to keep you up, so maybe I'ma keep you up. Fine.
Second half of the pre-chorus gets a bit more complicated. The rhythms are still mostly just 16th and 8th notes, but now there are quarter notes thrown in as well. In addition, her range shortens, no longer hitting the high D, just the A above middle C. The above vocal harmonies get a bit more complicated, especially on the word squeaky, and then we have an unpitched ad-lib underneath all of that.
I've been drinking coffee, and I've been eating healthy, No one keeps squeaky, saving on my energy.
The only change we ever get to the pre-chorus is the second time around the ad-libs are a little bit different.
I've been drinking coffee, and I've been eating healthy, No one keeps squeaky, saving on my energy.
Chorus.
Chorus starts off simple enough, 16th notes and 8th notes and various combinations thereof. Lowest note is that F and highest note is that D, and the additional harmonies at the end do this lovely ascending line.
Can you stay up all night? Fuck me till the daylight. 30 for 35.
In the first chorus, the second phrase simply repeats the first one with an additional vocal line in the middle.
Can you stay up all night? Fuck me till the daylight. 30 for 35.
Continuing that trend in following choruses, the real only change are those additional vocals that happen in between the harmonies on top and the main vocal line on the bottom, although it gets more and more complicated as time goes on.
Can you stay up all night? Fuck me till the daylight. 30 for 35.
Moving along in the second half of the second chorus, we even get an additional ad-lib at the very bottom, and notice that that ad-lib vocal melody in the middle continues past the actual chorus.
Can you stay up all night? Fuck me till the daylight. 30 for 35.
The final chorus kind of draws it back a little bit, although we still have that additional vocal line in the middle.
Can you stay up all night? Fuck me till the daylight. 30 for 35.
And just like the second chorus, the back half of the third chorus has that middle vocal line getting more and more complicated with a big melisma at the end, and yes, includes those unpitched ad-libs on the bottom.
Can you stay up all night? Fuck me till the daylight. 30 for 35.
bridge.
The bridge starts off with Ariana Grande almost doing straight 16th notes and has her very low in her range, bottoming out at that G below the staff with that one additional upper harmony at the end.
Baby, you might need a seatbelt when I'm riding. I'ma leave it open like a door, come inside it. Even though I'm wavy, you can hit it like a side chick. Don't need no side dick, no.
As the bridge goes on, we do less 16th notes, get higher in her range, the upper vocal harmonies come in, as well as some additional unpitched ad-libs on the bottom.
Got the neighbors yelling earthquake. 12.5 wanna make the best shake. Put it down heavy even though it's lightweight. Yeah.
As the bridge continues, we have even less 16th notes, doing more triplets, work higher in the range, those vocal harmonies just joining her on the end of each sentence, an additional harmony below her, especially near the end, and we still have those unpitched ad-libs at the bottom.
Yeah, we started at midnight, go till the sunrise, done at the same time. But I was counting the time when we got it for life.
Ending out the bridge, Grande has switched just to triplets, those vocal harmonies emphasizing the end of every sentence, and the unpitched ad-libs emphasizing the end of the phrase as well.
I know all your favorite spots, we could take it from the top. You're such a dream come true, true. Make a bitch wanna hit snooze, ooh.
Outro.
The outro has an auto-tuned Ariana Grande on the lower end of her range, and it starts off basically explaining what the song means.
Means I want a 69 with you. No shit.
As it gets quieter, we get a few more ad-libs low in her range and her laughing, and I had to crank it just so you could hear it.
Math class never was good.
Another example of what you think is a simplistic pop song until you actually start digging into it and picking it apart. I didn't spell out any formal harmonies here because they're just resultant chords that happen between the strings and the vocal line. But if you do want the chords, they end up being like G minor 9, F major 9, C7 sus flat 9, D7 flat 9. There's like an F sharp diminished 7 in there somewhere, but it just gets super dense harmonically speaking, especially with all of Ariana Grande's vocal harmonies on top of this as well. Honestly, if there's gonna be a day where I just sit down to analyze songs like this, I really have to remember to start
Saving on my energy. Can you stay up all night? Fuck me till the daylight. 30 for 35.
Never thought I'd see the day when I actually have to transcribe what is essentially a string quartet in a pop song. Thank you, Mr. Peter Lee Johnson, for that.
Can you stay up all night? Fuck me till the daylight.